Tonight on Politics Unplugged, are state lawmakers building a $300 million Trojan horse to protect the state's school voucher program? We get the latest. Negotiations over Chase Field picked up this week, but are state leaders any closer to a deal that keeps the Diamondbacks in downtown Phoenix? And bad news for anyone who hates those political ads. A Republican candidate for governor is already throwing down millions of dollars on a new commercial, 15 months ahead of the 2026 primary election. Why is she doing this now, and will it work? Our panel breaks it down on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. The legislature needs to act to preserve education funding with Prop 123, but Democrats fear that Senate Republicans will use this as an opportunity to enshrine private school vouchers in the state constitution. And here to talk about that, Senate Minority Leader Priya Sundareshan, a Democrat from Tucson. We should note that Senate Republican J.D. Mesnar was invited to join the conversation. He could not make it here for this taping, but he will be part of the Politics Unplugged podcast to talk about this issue. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks,
now, this has been an issue that really was top of the list for the governor heading into the legislative session. And what Prop 123 is, people who don't remember, it's a Doug Ducey era measure that was passed about 10 years ago, and it takes money out of the state land trust, $300 million a year, and it puts it into education funding. That is set to it's run out or already has run out, unless voters can extend it at the ballot box. Talk us through and take us through this process this year, trying to get this extended, trying to get this to the ballot to extend it.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. The Prop 123 funding, knowing that it's coming up on a deadline and it's going to be needing to be renewed by the voters pretty soon. This year, we started the session with a dedicated push for renewal of that Prop 123 funding. There have been negotiations starting in January or even earlier with our education stakeholders, the governor's office, and legislators to figure out how to move that forward. We've always known, Democrats in the Senate have always known that there's likely going to be some things in there that the Republicans would try to put in that were not acceptable to us. So we went ahead and introduced a clean extension of Prop 123 at the very beginning of session, knowing that this is something that was a Ducey era policy that was supported broadly across the spectrum, and we just had a clean continuation to move forward and say, this was good enough for you then, let's continue to just simply renew it now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people came to depend on that funding, although it narrowly passed back during Doug, I believe it was 2015, 2016, when it passed. It did so by very narrow numbers. But were Republicans talking about this in the opening negotiations about adding more stuff? Were they specific about what they wanted to add to this extension, or are we seeing something new recently here?
We've known that Republicans have wanted to limit the use of any renewal of Prop 123 funds to certain kinds of jobs and certain kind of teacher pay, which has already been very controversial. And so we know that they've already been trying to limit what those funds can be used for. What we're seeing in the last couple of days is a completely new, out of the blue addition of potentially unrelated topics to add to this proposal. And honestly, you know, that this comes after a month in which it was crickets. There was silence. They seemed to have walked away from the negotiation table. Now we know why. They were cooking something up that was going to include something worse.
Yeah, and part of that is they want to include, according to some reporting I've read and some of the sources I've spoken to, they want to enshrine, protect the state school voucher program in the Constitution. Voter protected, meaning you could only make any changes, tweaks to the ESA program through the ballot box. The legislature would have almost nothing to do with that. So want to get your thoughts on that, about that coming out right now.
Yeah, that's really alarming to see that they would try to enshrine these universal voucher protections in the state constitution. That's something that can potentially tank the whole proposal. As you noted, Prop 123 did narrowly pass. And so why would they try to add something that we know the voters are not supportive of? You know, when the Republicans a few years ago passed the universal school voucher expansion in the dead of night, they did so by overriding the will of the voters who had already said no to that voucher expansion.
And have you heard of anything else that Republicans have wanted? Because we haven't seen any language yet on this proposal. We might see this in the coming week or the week after. Have you seen any other proposals, any other adds to this bill that they want to send to the ballot?
We've seen nothing, and that's what's concerning to us. You know, we think it's going to include some kind of voucher protections. We don't know. We haven't seen the language. It does make us wonder why they've been silent for so long in these negotiations, why they've walked away from the table. We'll see what comes out of it, but it's pretty concerning.
And, you know, have you checked with legal counsel? What have you heard? What are your thoughts on this idea that this could violate the single subject rule in Arizona? Is that you have to limit these ballot measures to, you know, specific subjects? Because, you know, years ago, people decided they didn't want what they call Christmas trees going to the ballot, where there's all these different ideas in one bill. Would this violate the single subject rule?
We'll have to check with legal counsel once we see the language itself, but at first blush, the idea of combining the voucher protections with the Prop 123 ideas of school funding, public school funding, it seems like two separate topics to me. And honestly, if we are trying to do something, put ballot referrals on these two separate topics, I would ask that maybe they could do two separate ballot referrals. As we know, the Republicans are not averse to loading up the ballot with a number of ballot referrals, so why not go ahead and make these two separate ones?
And, you know, what do you think this does to the campaign? Because obviously, it's, you know, this doesn't need the governor's signature. It goes to the ballot in 2026. If this goes as the Republicans want it to go and they throw on the ESA program, obviously it loses a lot of support from the left. I mean, the teacher union's not going to support this. Democrats not going to support this. The governor's not going to support this, raise money for it. What does this do politically then?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right question. I think that it makes it likely that Prop 123 does not pass if you are adding in these proposals that Democrats will not support and outside stakeholders, the educators, will not support, something that enshrines voucher protections into the Constitution. And given that Prop 123 passed so slimly the first time, those are needed stakeholders that you want in the fight.
And how does this then affect education K-12 system? Because it's a lot of money. This could go down. I mean, if Prop 123 extension goes down because of the ESA stuff, the bigger picture is the schools would be out $300 million a year.
Well, as I've heard even Senate President Warren Peterson say from the beginning of this session that there's no real need to pass 123 because the general fund will kick in the rest of the funding. You know, we'll have to hold him to his word and show that we are going to be adequately supporting education funding through our budgetary processes, and I hope that we'll see that reflected in this budget. All
right, thank you very much for stopping by here, Senator Sundareshan, for talking about this important issue. And still ahead, the effort to keep the Diamondbacks downtown went all the way to the governor's office this week, so can they reach a deal? That's next when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. State leaders have been working hard on a deal to pay for renovations at Chase Field and to keep the Diamondbacks downtown. So are they going to find a plan that everyone can get behind? Here to talk about that, reporter Jeremy Duda from Axios. Thank you very much for being here. We've been covering this, it seems like, for a long time. This has been a years-long back and forth between the county, between the team. It's now we have talks that have gone all the way up to the governor's office. What are you hearing about those?
Well, from what I've heard, it sounds like the talks went pretty well. I mean, it took a while for this to happen, for all the stakeholders to get together, with the ninth floor and kind of start hashing out the details. But we've just had I think the one meeting late last week, and but from the reports I've heard, from what I've heard, sounds like things gone well. People seem optimistic they'll be able to hammer out a deal. There's still, I think, a lot of issues to go over, but this is definitely progress.
Yeah, and what's been the major hold-up, sticking point here as we head down the stretch to a potential bill, a deal that we at the legislature?
Well, about a month ago, there was a big amendment to this that was meant to address some of the concerns about how much money could be spent out of this, where some of the tax revenue was coming from. But in doing that, they kind of created some new issues. There had already been an issue about taking money from the city of Phoenix, and then they added taking some money from Maricopa County as well. And that turned, you already had Mayor Kate Gallego, who was not happy about what the city was going to be losing. The county was neutral, taking the money from the, from the county in that amendment. That changed them to an opponent too. So now they have kind of a vested interest in seeing some changes as well. And the governor had been signaling for a while, and she may have even said outright at some point that she, planned to, she was going to sign the bill as it was. The opposition, the concerns she was hearing were not enough necessarily to dissuade her. Now, this, kind of the talking point we're hearing more is she wants the city and county on board too.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, what was behind some of that? Because, like, her position certainly did shift on that. Because, like you were saying, about a month ago, she all but signaled she was going to sign this thing if it got to her desk, and now she's saying, she wants the city, the county behind this. Was it pressure from the counties, from the cities, that has moved the governor in this direction, or did something else happen?
Hard to say. That very much could be it. I mean, with the city, you just had kind of the one group. I mean, obviously there are other opponents as well, but the city is just kind of the one major stakeholders opposed in terms of the revenue. You add the county to the mix, you have a whole new opponent. You're starting to get more opposition, and if you're going to kind of placate one, you have to placate the other. So now they have to figure out something that will get either holds them harmless financially, or at least close enough that they won't, get in the way and won't oppose it.
And let's talk a little bit about this, the broader view on stadiums and public financing on this. It just seems at this point, we've gone through it here recently in the Valley with the Coyote Arena, and you look nationally, it just seems like the public's attitude toward giving these billionaire franchises any kind of a handout with public resources, kind of that era is kind of gone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's completely dead, but I think in the last 10 years or so, you've seen a major shift in public opinion, not just here, but nationwide, as there's just less appetite for these kinds of big publicly funded projects, and people want to see the teams pay more for that. It's one of the concerns we're hearing here on the Diamondbacks bills, that does not necessarily actually bind the team to spending the money it says they're willing to spend. It says they intend to do so, but it doesn't require it. So that seems like another potential sticking point, just based on I think those broader public concerns about whether the teams are actually going to be spending their own money. Well,
and also too, I think if I remember right, there was some consternation about some concern about like the penalty if they broke the lease early or broke the deal early and left town anyway. Like the DBacks would only have to pay out $10 million for $1 billion franchise. It's probably, a lot of people see that as, that's not much of a penalty.
Yeah, and I forget what the actual dollar figure is, but yeah, that's maybe that's something that they change as the negotiations go on.
Yeah, and given all that, I mean, I've been told that like this is likely the way it's going to pass is going to be part of a broader budget package of bills. You've been down at the Capitol as long as I've been down at the Capitol, and we've seen a lot of strange things. Those bills tend to pass in the middle of the night. If the legislature goes ahead and does something like that, how do you think it gets received the next day by the public?
Definitely something where the kind of the more transparency, the more exposure you have, the happier, or at least less opposed, members of the public will be. I don't know if they can do it in the budget. I mean, we've seen them historically. They would load up these budget bills with all kinds of random stuff. The Arizona Supreme Court, at least partially shut the door to some of the more egregious practices. But even if they can't do it in the budget, there's other ways to pass this in the middle of the night. So
yeah, there's always ways to pass something in the middle of the night with the state lawmakers. But no, I was told it was to be a standalone bill, but it would be part of like a package of bills down there. And I'm just kind of wondering what the public perception would be. Like, look, if you go in and do something like this, come together, you put together a deal and you pass it out very quickly, and be it in the middle of the night or just when people aren't really watching, what the public perception might be.
Sure, I mean, anything passed in the middle of the night like that, especially on such a controversial topic as public funding for sports teams' stadiums, I think the less transparency is the less trust there's going to be from the public. So if people wake up on a Wednesday morning and turn on the radio, look at the news and say, oh, they did this in the middle of the night and this is going to give $500 million to the Diamondbacks. I think some people might not be too happy about that. We've had committee hearings on this bill already, but if it undergoes major changes, I think people might want to see more.
Yeah, and let's wrap on this, man. You can put on your prediction hat and maybe see how this all plays out. Do you expect to see a deal here really soon? Maybe what do you think it looks like, and does it get broad bipartisan support?
soonish, sometime this session, which probably goes for a couple more months. I think they will get to a deal, keeping the Diamondbacks here or ensuring that they don't leave. I think that's too important to too many people for something not to happen here. Exactly when that happens is hard to say. I mean, the session will probably drag on until late June, the way things are looking. So they've got some time to work on this.
Yeah, it doesn't look like doesn't seem like they're in any rush right now to get done with the session at this point. But Jeremy Duda from Axios, thanks for stopping by here to talk about this. And up next, I'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including a very early and expensive start to the political commercial season. That's next on Politics Unplugged. And to get more in-depth on the issues, check out the Politics Unplugged podcast. This week, we talk with State Senator J.D. Mesnard about education funding in Arizona. The Politics Unplugged podcast drops every Sunday evening wherever you get your podcasts. And do you miss seeing all those political ads we had last year? Well, probably not, but they've already started for the next election, 15 months away. Let's bring in our panel to talk about that. Republican consultant Marcus Dell'Artino and former Democratic lawmaker Isela Blanc. I can't believe we're already seeing ads for the 2026 gubernatorial election. What is going on here? Karrin Taylor Robson says she's spending a few $1 million on this initial ad buy. And if you look at the ad, it's pretty blatantly obvious. She's trying to brand herself as the Trump candidate, even though Donald Trump endorsed both her and her likely primary opponent, Andy Biggs.
Would you say that because they mentioned Trump's name like 16 times in a 30-second ad? Is that why you're making
Well, we
that
actually measured it. It was a
assertion?
30-second ad, and it's like Trump is either seen or heard in 15 seconds, exactly half of the 30-second ad.
Look, I'm just counting my blessings that it's only one candidate in one race, and we are not in a full-tilt battle for every campaign going on. So, but look, as part of the strategy goes, I don't think it's a bad idea to sort of start to set herself apart from her future opponent, which is Andy Biggs, and sort of what I would classify it as sort of the Chinese water torture of messaging, right? And you just do a few ads for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, does she risk upsetting voters who are just going to be annoyed seeing her up with these political ads already?
I mean, forget that. I'm just more concerned that she's willing to hitch her wagon to that horse, the Trump horse. I just, I get it, but yes, it is upsetting.
I mean, yeah. I mean, look. Donald Trump. Whatever you say, he won Arizona, but he is also his endorsement in the primary. It is the golden touch. There, he wins over and over. That's why his candidates seek these endorsements. They want this endorsement, and you see Karrin Taylor Robson obviously promoting that endorsement more than any other policy at this point. Is the fact that she was endorsed by that. Do you think, given what you've seen so far early in this race, do you think she has the advantage right now? Because we just saw some campaign finance reports. Andy Biggs had a pretty lackluster first quarter, $188,000 he brought in, and he is facing a challenger who can write checks to herself in the tens of millions of dollars.
Like, this race has 100 years to go, for God's sake. So saying anybody has an advantage now is just
I don't
craziness,
choose when these things start, but here we are, Marcus.
I will tell you this. Look, the criticism of Andy Biggs has always been his lack of ability to fundraise. And Karrin Taylor Robson doesn't really have that issue because she can self-fund her campaign. But there's 100 other factors here at choice. I mean, you're going to have outside interests, special interests, who are going to participate at higher levels than the actual candidate campaigns of themselves. Mm-hmm. And so that very well may level the playing field on fundraising.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the best thing for Governor Hobbs, there was some Lori Roberts, friend of the show here, and she had written this week that maybe if Hobbs would face a very tough road in the general election if Karrin Taylor Robson wins, that she would have an easier time to win re-election if Andy Biggs won the nomination. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I definitely think, I think that would have also been true the first go-round. If Ms. Robson had won, we would not be looking at a Katie Hobbs governor. Mm-hmm. No, with all due respect to the governor. And so we're looking at the same thing. It looks different with Robson, and if we get Biggs, then I think we'll see another 4 years of Katie Hobbs.
All right, I want to stick with you because you're very well connected with the education world. obviously. We were talking about Proposition 123 here just a minute ago. How do you see this if Republicans push through and get this ESA protection as part of the ballot language on this? They lose all sorts of support for the extension of this from Democrats, from the Education Association. How do you see this campaign playing out?
I mean, I think it's. I think we're going to see it playing out here in the next couple of weeks between the Democrats and what happens when the Prop 123 bill is introduced and when people start to see the amendment. If the rumors are true and the amendment is about enshrining a program that has little guardrails, little to no guardrails, in a state where we have questionable funding at a time where our economic outcomes are looking a little bit questionable here in the next year or two, it definitely it adds a lot of questions. I guess all to say that it's a bad idea to enshrine a really bad program into our constitutional amendment and, as you called it, a Trojan horse.
And what's your take on this? I mean, at the beginning of the year, it seemed like, Democrats, the governor really wanted to extend Prop 123, the $300 million a year. You put ESAs on this, that loses all support. What happens with this campaign? How does it play out?
This will be the battle royale in between the AEA versus Turning Point USA, and look, that it will pale in comparison to the amount of special interest money played in this one. I think, to expect to see Trump in an ad, and maybe Linda McMahon, and I would
Betsy
let her
DeVos.
comment,
Betsy DeVos.
and a whole host of others. But it will be the battle royale.
Yeah, and you worked down at the legislature for a number of years. Were you surprised when you heard this?
I mean, are we ever really surprised with the fact that we have Republicans that always want to throw everything as a ballot referral? Which, to that point, if they're interested in enshrining vouchers into the Constitution, they should introduce their own separate ballot referral bill.
Yeah, and do you think this gets past the single subject rule?
I have no earthly clue, because as you know, I'm not
lawyers,
a judge.
But we could play lawyers right here at this table.
It's if I were on the Democratic side of the aisle and the AEA side of the aisle, it's exactly what I would do. It is the most efficient way to keep this off the ballot, is go to the courts. And the courts have certainly in the last couple of years been taking a very closer look on the violation of the single subject rule. So I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't pass. I will tell you that much.
Yeah, and I want to stick with education. I definitely wanted to ask you this. I think this is something near and dear to you. It looks like Donald Trump is taking aim at a voter initiative here in Arizona that would the voters said we want to give in-state tuition to dreamers, young migrants who were brought here as kids through no fault of their own or anything like that. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it's ridiculous that we are trying to prevent young people from continuing with their education. Let's be clear. Folks who move on to higher education actually contribute to our society. And that is what Trump is saying. He's saying we do not want these folks that want to continue with higher education, who will contribute as doctors, as educators, as attorneys, as engineers. It is nonsense. It is not about saving the community from crime. If anything, we are preventing good people from continuing on with higher education, and something that the voters approved.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. That is all the time we have, but be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.